some people in sports can get by just based off athleticism, and they'll hang around the NBA for 5-10 years and kind of have mediocre careers. But if you're going to be the best at what you do, regardless of how talented you are, you have to have an elite work ethic, in my opinion.
Welcome to the Two Sales Guys podcast with your hosts, Sean Whitley and Matthew Sopiers. What's commonly talked about are the tactics and methodologies for sales professionals. What is less commonly talked about is the stress and anxiety that comes with being a seller. Each day, sales reps are asked to take rejection after rejection, operate in a world of uncertainty and high pressure, and either fail to hit their number or get a higher quota the next year. We'll talk about how to cope with these pressures and what a winning sales mindset really looks like. Sales is often called a performance business, and we'll explore how stress can drive bad selling behaviors, and alternatively, we'll look to experts on how you can manage your mind and wellness first so that you're putting your best foot forward every day at work. We'll talk to professionals in the industry who share the same experiences and what organizations can do to create a healthy, winning sales culture.
Today, we have a longtime friend of Matt and I, Chris Jensen, joining the show. Chris has been the number one seller for multiple years at multiple companies. He's been a part of 2 large acquisitions, one at Telesign and one at Signal FX, who was acquired for $1 billion. And he joins us today to share some of his experiences as a successful enterprise seller. And with that, Chris, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Really excited to be here.
Chris, I'm super stoked to talk to you today, and we've had conversations with people with all sorts of backgrounds, but I think on this show, this is our first conversation with a true enterprise salesperson, and I think there's so much that anyone in the sales profession can learn from you, and so I'm excited to have a conversation with you today. Before we get into some of the topics that we talked about in our prep, I'd love to hear from your side, Chris, because I'm not sure I actually know this story. How did you end up getting into the sales profession in the first place?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think like a lot of young kids initially, I had my eyes set on being a professional athlete. One day it was football, the next it was basketball, and then baseball. But once I finally came to the realization that I didn't have the size, speed, and athleticism to pursue a professional sports career, I really always knew sales was what I wanted to get into. And the main reason is because of my upbringing. So my dad was in sales his entire career, so I was constantly around it. He would work from home 2 days a week, so I could see firsthand kind of what the job entailed. And even occasionally he would let me tag along with him. So I always remember the father-son work days, which were like, I don't know if you guys ever did that, but it was like once a year, dads would bring their sons into work. So it was kind of cool because like we would go into the office, check that out, but the majority of the day was spent out in the field. So we would just visit customers around the Bay Area. That's where I grew up. And I was always so into it, just like being able to go into offices, meet with a bunch of new people, hear what problems they had, and start exploring how you could potentially solve those for them. So it was always something that struck me as new and exciting every day. And another big thing was just kind of the freedom and creativity of it, where, I mean, I know nowadays everyone's used to kind of being remote and being able to do their own thing. But at least back then it was pretty rare for people to just not have to go into an office and be able to jump in a car and just drive around and pop into lobbies and see if you can get 5 to 10 minutes of someone's time. So that was always super appealing to me. So as soon as I gave up on the professional sports dream, sales it was.
That's cool. I don't think I've ever met anyone before that has a parent that was in sales. Sean, have you talked to anyone before that had that?
No.
That's pretty unique. Do you ever talk to your dad like still, or did you talk to your dad in the past about like strategy or deals or just sales in general? Or is he retired and doesn't want to talk about it at all anymore?
You know, he's retired, but I talk to him quite a bit about it. So I'm always bouncing ideas off of him. Sometimes it's just venting about opportunities that are going sideways. But most of the time it's just strategic discussions, right? Like, hey, if you were in my position, how would you handle this? What could I be doing better? So, I mean, he's been a great mentor for me. So,
cool.
He was very successful in sales. So no, it's cool. And I think he enjoys it, right? He's retired. So it's really the only thing that pulls him back into business.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, not to go too deep into that topic, but do you guys ever talk about the differences in the world of sales that he lived in versus the world of sales that you've lived in, especially with the advent of technology?
We do. So, I mean, like I said, growing up around him and being able to see him working from home a couple of days a week, I mean, he was on the phone all day, and it was cold calls. When he wasn't working from home, he was in the car, literally driving around office to office, popping in the lobby, handing out business cards, asking if he could get 5 to 10 minutes of someone's time. Whereas today, I mean, things are so much different. You have different security protocols where a lot of times you can't get anywhere near the lobby of an office if you don't have a set meeting, right? So early on in my career, actually, when I just graduated from college, I implemented a lot of the same tactics he did, right? So I would put together kind of folders with content and business cards and pop into lobbies to drop it off. And that worked really well for a while, but things started changing. So I realized that I needed to adapt and evolve my strategies, and things became much more digital. So it was less phone, more email, more chat, which back in his day, I mean, I don't think he knew how to work email until maybe the last 5 years of his career. So it was all phone. It was all in person. So yeah, it's fun to chat with him about the very different sales world that we live in today.
Oh, that's cool, man. Well, I know we're here to talk a little bit about stress management and sales and how you keep your edge mentally to continue to be a top performer. But there is a question that I didn't put on the list that I wanted to ask you, which is relevant to the topic in that, like, as an enterprise seller, you know, you're not doing a lot of deals in the course of a year. You know, there's usually a handful of deals that are really going to make your number. And you know, in a lot of ways, you're playing the long game. And for most of the year, you aren't closing business. You're working towards closing business. I'd love to hear from you, Chris, like planning and how you think about your years, like coming into a new year with a new quota, like what tactics, like thought processes, like planning, anything that you can really share as it relates to how you kind of think about the upcoming year as we start a new year this year. And as that relates to enterprise sales and how you plan for the fact that, you know, there's only going to be a handful of deals that are going to get you to your number.
Yeah, you know, that's a great point, and it's something that could be extremely stressful, knowing that oftentimes one or two deals can make or break your year. So, I mean, from my experience, what's most important is making sure everyone that you're pursuing, so every company on your list, and sometimes, I mean, it could be as few as 5, right? It could be as many as 50. Everyone knows who you are and what you do. So getting the brand awareness out there. And when you're in the startup world, it's harder than it sounds, because you could be working for a Series A 20-person company competing against juggernauts. So you don't have a seat at the table initially. So a lot of it is doing tactics that your competition's not doing. For example, at Signal FX, when I was building out the Southwest region, I realized very early on, no one knew who we were. No one knew what we did. So what I did is I got in the car. I was handing out brochures, popping into lobbies like we talked about. Another thing I did is I would put together these gift baskets for more senior level contacts. And the baskets would have a bottle of wine. They would have a brochure. They would have swag, which is big in the DevOps world. As weird as it sounds, we would hand out socks or T-shirts or hats or stickers. And a lot of these people really loved that and appreciated it. And slowly we built up the brand awareness. So we would have a seat at the table when projects came about, knowing that projects aren't going to happen every year for these companies, right? So you just have to have your name out there. You got to make sure you continue to get high and wide in these organizations too. Oftentimes you're working 7-8 figure deals, but if you can bang out some 6-figure deals that can kind of get you by with land and expand deals or smaller business units or use cases, I mean, all that's extremely important. So that's kind of my general approach.
In case it's not coming across to our audience, like as you can tell, Chris is pretty even keeled. So even through those types of ups and downs throughout the year, in the years that we worked together, you kept things pretty level-headed and just kept forging ahead towards those goals. So one of the things we want to talk about is we really learned that people experience stress in different ways, even though they're going through very similar scenarios. And as an experienced, successful seller, we'd love to know, like, what's your relationship with stress and what's it been like throughout your career in sales?
Sure. So, I mean, stress is always around us in various facets of our lives, both personal and professional. And in my opinion, it's not something you'll ever be able to completely get rid of. So the question I ask myself is, how do you mitigate it? And there's a few things that I try to do to remove as much stress as possible. The first is I always try to establish a routine to remove as much unknown from my life and my day as possible. For me, it always starts with making my bed. I'm not sure if you guys saw that speech that went viral by the Navy Admiral, but basically the whole premise of it was start each day by making your bed and count that as a small accomplishment. And from there, you'll be able to quickly move on to the next one and kind of chalk it up as a small victory. So I try to do that. I also try to map out my days in advance or write down what I want to achieve. That helps me define what success looks like and holds me more accountable. So the more I could adhere to a schedule, the better off I find myself being in the long run, which nowadays is more difficult to do now that I have two young kids and working from home with my wife working from home as well. So there's constant noise and chaos around my household, but I try to do that as much as possible. The second thing I find that's helpful is just try to be prepared as much as possible too. So preparation is key for really everything you do. The more prepared I am, the less stressful and the fewer kind of anxiety that I end up having. When you go into sales calls and sales meetings, I always try to draft prep documents talking about who we're meeting with, what we're trying to accomplish, what I potentially think that person or that group of people are interested in, what potential objections could come up. So preparation is key. And then kind of third is just mental and physical health. So this is something I feel that's more important than ever with the pandemic. Things I do mentally to try to stay fresh is meditate. So I use the Calm app. I find that's something at the end of the day that kind of calms me down a bit. I'll even throw it on if I'm moving into kind of a stressful meeting and I just need to level out a bit. I also tried for just mental well-being, continued improvement. So I'll try to listen to podcasts. I recently signed up for Masterclass, so looking forward to digging into that a little bit. And then physically, I always try to carve out some time for a workout, even if it's just 15 minutes. I find that it's a good reset for my day. Helps me to stay fresh and energized. A good sweat is something that's key as well. So, establishing a routine, being prepared, and mental and physical health.
So when you talk about like preparation, one of the things we actually talked about with another guest is visualization. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you've ever put that into practice in any way. Like maybe walk us through, like, what do you do like right before a meeting? Like you've got a big meeting coming up. I'm not talking about like the week before, but like right before the meeting. Is there anything that you do to prepare for it?
Yeah. So I think visualization is something I actually started doing when I played sports. I was an avid athlete growing up and played just about every sport you can imagine. And every time before I took the field, I always tried to visualize success, right? Whether it was scoring a touchdown or scoring a winning basket. I think it just reinforces positivity and helps you get into a good flow before a big game or a big match. And I think that's something that you could do as well in sales before a call or a meeting, kind of walk through that prep document and visualize how you anticipate that meeting playing out, what potential objections could come out and kind of how you're going to combat those. So yeah, it's not only applicable to sports. I think visualizing success it's positive reinforcement, right? And positivity is key to keep you upbeat. I think that another thing to keep in mind is when you're having these conversations, people can pick up very, very quickly your attitude and how you're feeling. And the more energized and more positive you can be on calls, the higher the likelihood is that they're going to leave that call feeling pretty good about how things went. Whereas if you're down or dejected, they can say like, you know what, like, I don't think that guy even believed in what he was selling. Like, why should we be fired up about it? So that's key.
It's a little off topic, maybe, but I'd seen a comedian who was giving a class to other comedians, like on some skills and things that they learned of being a solid stand-up. And one of the things they said to get people halfway is be smiling. And I think it's a similar parallel to what you're talking about, just the attitude and how confident you are, that you're already getting them halfway there. Like, and the example would be like, if I'm telling you this story about this crazy thing that happened to me, it's so funny, guys, listen, and I'm telling you about it, and I'm already sort of like stumbling over my words because I'm smiling and giggling so much. You're naturally like smiling and like waiting to hear what happened, And so similarly in a sales environment, if you're enthusiastic and energized and you really are passionate about like what you're saying, it comes across with this energy. You got them halfway there to try and close that gap on their end of how will this work for me? Why would I want this, Yeah.
I mean, people definitely feed off other people's reactions, right? It's like if you're a coach and you're giving this very passionate speech, but you're delivering it in a way where you could tell you're not fired up about what you're saying. I mean, the reaction of the team you're saying it to, they're going to be pretty flat as well. So, I mean, the best speeches are the rah speeches where at the end of it, it's like not only is the coach fired up, but the team stands up and they're clapping and they're hitting helmets together and they're breaking down doors because they can't get to the field fast enough to execute on what was just talked about. So completely agree.
Well, and I think like whether it's meditation or visualization or preparation, whatever we want to call it, I think people forget sometimes just to take a few minutes before the next call to breathe a little bit, calm down, think about what's going to happen. I think too often people are just going from thing to thing to thing, and they forget to kind of take a moment to slow down, and it shows up on the call with people being frantic and disorganized. That's never a good thing as well. I wanted to ask you too, Chris. I mean, one of the most stressful things about sales is when we lose deals. And I don't know that it hurts. We've all lost a ton of deals and been a part of them and feel like they all hurt equally. And that pain never really goes away, especially with the athlete in all of us and that we want to win. And I'd love to hear from you, like, what's your process for after a loss and how do you respond to when you get bad news that a deal's not going to go forward?
Yeah. It's tough. As a competitor, I never want to lose, regardless of how big or how small the deal is. It's going to sting. I mean, I try to treat it as a learning experience, right? So definitely take time to reflect on what just happened, what could have been done different to potentially that could have potentially led to a different result. So that's important. I think you also have to have kind of a short memory in some of those situations too, though, like you were saying, so it doesn't impact what you're doing next. You don't want that negativity to transfer over to another call or another meeting, and as a result, potentially lead to a loss as well. So learn from it. Make sure it's a learning experience, not only for yourself, but for the entire team. I'm a big believer you don't win or lose as an individual. You win or lose as a team. So make sure that you sit down with the team, kind of cover everyone's role throughout the sales engagement, and figure out what you can do to become better and more effective moving forward. So that's kind of my general approach. I'm also a very persistent person, so I never like to view an opportunity as completely lost. I like to view it as a delayed decision and a potential for us to come back in and get the business at a later date. So another thing I'll try to do is with the company that we were engaged with is to continue to build champions, to continue to get higher and wider, plant landmines too moving forward. So they may have selected another company, but if you're at the right place with the right supporting team and the right product, they didn't make the right decision. So make sure they know what to look for moving forward as they partner with another company. And if you play that right, oftentimes you're going to be the first call that company makes when something goes wrong. So that's my philosophy there.
Yeah, I know like one of the things that I've always done with lost deals is I'll ask them for a conversation after, and I'll typically just, try to get their unfiltered feedback as to what we could have done better to position ourselves in the deal. And I don't know that a lot of folks do that. A lot of companies, a lot of reps do that. And I think obviously you're able to inform yourselves about the things the company could have done better, or you as a rep could have done better to produce a different outcome. But then I think a lot of times it shows a ton of professionalism on your part, that you're trying to improve and get better. And a lot of times that continues to build upon the relationship you've already built with that person. And to your point, later on, hopefully be opportunistic when something goes wrong. So that's really cool, Chris. I think that's great feedback.
Yeah, no, I mean, you made a great point there, right? And that's something I didn't do very well early in my sales career is when I got an email saying like, hey, we decided to go in another direction, I would get very angry at first and kind of deflect blame, right? Like, well, it's that person's fault. And I've learned it's so important to seek feedback directly from the customer and ideally multiple people across the engagement, right? It's what could I be doing better with my approach? What could we be doing better as a company with our products? Is there anything we could potentially do moving forward that would better position us to earn your business? I mean, some of that information you're going to gather throughout the sales process, but what I often find is in these longer enterprise type sales cycles, you've invested so much time in it that more often than not, the prospect or the customer is going to be more than happy to spend 30 minutes with you and walk you through and provide some pretty extensive feedback.
Today's episode is brought to you by Teachable. Are you an expert at something? Then why don't you share what you know? Create online courses and coaching services and transform your experience and know-how into a thriving knowledge business. Or are you looking to learn from a master of something? Then why don't you check out all these amazing online courses from masters of hundreds of different topics? If so, then head on over to the2salesguys.com/teachable. When you were at Telesign, you were a top performing seller, always fighting for that number one spot year after year. You were the guy, right? And lots of people were looking for advice from you, whether it was new reps that are just trying to, hear what your techniques are, what they could be doing better, getting advice, or there's product folks that are looking to introduce, new products and to your customers or get market insights on what they're developing. Like, how did you manage all those different demands of being the top performer while, really producing in a rapidly growing startup?
Yeah. So, I mean, I wouldn't be where I am today without some great mentors. At Telesign, it was Forrest Hobbs and Matt Kamasa. More recently at Signal FX, it was guys like Mark Craney, Travis Patterson, and Jason Stewart. And I'm a firm believer in paying it forward. So I'm always more than happy to spend time with people to help make them more successful. One of the benefits of a startup is, for the most part, everyone has equity. So they should be very motivated to help each other out to ensure a successful exit. So it's bringing people together as a team to making sure everyone's working together to make people better as individuals and therefore have more success as a company.
That's good. And you mentioned mentors, and we had an opportunity to chat a little bit about the differences in management styles and sales leadership and some of the folks that we've had a benefit of working with in our time together. In your opinion, What preferences do you have, or what do you think is important as it relates to how sales leaders manage or lead sales organizations, and how that impacts both what it's like for you to sell at the company, as well as like how does it just make it easier on your day job every day?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think the most important thing is trust. And everyone across the business, not just in sales, needs to hire people that they trust. And if there's complete trust, you should never feel like you need to micromanage someone. And you should allow them to approach their business in their own unique way. That's made them very successful in the past. The most successful sales leaders I've worked for are people that don't tell individuals how to do their jobs. They ask what role they can play in ensuring their success. And they're providing the playbook, right? But then they're allowing people to run their own plays to achieve the desired results for the business. So that's just so important. I mean, in enterprise sales, if you're going to have a successful team, like you need to allow people to have their freedom and be creative with their approach. I mean, oftentimes I see people say like, hey, you need to make X number of calls per day. You need to send X number of emails. And that does strip them of their creativity to some extent, in my opinion, because maybe someone's been successful in the past, primarily off email or LinkedIn or whatever it may be. At the end of the day, what matters is the revenue that they're contributing to the business. So that should be the focus. And if they've been successful in the past, and if you trust them, you should allow them to approach it in their own unique way. So,
just thinking about like an interesting question is like, what pisses you off the most about? And this could be anything as it relates to sales, but like your number one pet peeve about the sales profession that like really pisses you off.
Oh man, where do I start? I think for me, it could be work ethic. If people don't share the same drive to be successful, like I said earlier, I mean, it's a team game, right? You're going to win or you're going to lose as a team, and everyone should be held accountable to making their contribution. And it just bothers me when I see people that aren't willing to work as hard. One of the things I always like to say is, if you look at the all-time greats, I mean, we could use sports as an example. They're all people who work extremely hard. Like, you could be the most gifted person on the planet, but if you don't have an elite work ethic, you're never going to be the best at what you do. I mean, you could take Michael Jordan, Tiger Woods, Tom Brady as examples. I mean, a lot of those people are very gifted in their own right. But they're also people that just are willing to outwork their competition. Like, they're going to train harder. They're going to be up when other people are sleeping. They're going to be out working when other people want to take time off and go on vacation. So I think you have to have that same mentality in sales. You could be the most talented sales individual on the planet, but if the guy at a competing company is outworking you, it's just hard to make that up, right? Like, some people in sports can get by just based off athleticism, and they'll hang around the NBA for 5-10 years and kind of have mediocre careers. But if you're going to be the best at what you do, regardless of how talented you are, you have to have an elite work ethic, in my opinion.
I feel like in a smaller startup company, when you have that elite work ethic and a skill set that you're, naturally gifted with, it's going to rise to the top a little more obviously than maybe being at a large organization where there's a lot more going on, a lot more sellers, different kinds of sales, different sales leadership. I guess just trying to understand, like, what was that transition like going from the small startup world into a bigger, corporation?
Yeah. It's a bigger adjustment than I anticipated. One of the things that I realized is I'm truly a startup guy at heart. I love the fast pace and agility of a startup and being able to build something special from the ground up. I feel like at bigger companies, things tend to move a lot slower. And you can't always be responsive to a prospect or to customers' needs. Also, as an individual contributor in a bigger company, you tend not to have as much control and influence over a deal. But at the same time, I mean, going through the acquisition of SignalFX by Splunk was definitely a great experience. And having the opportunity to work at a massively successful company like Splunk definitely has its own benefits. I mean, having incredible brand awareness and a large existing customer base does a lot for a seller. If I could sell something that's already known into a company that already has a strong partnership established, it could definitely help accelerate deals. So there's positives and negatives to both. But to answer your question, it is a big adjustment because there's not a whole lot alike. But as a seller, I mean, you just have to take the skill set that you built at startups and apply it to a bigger company and evolve it to some extent to make sure that you're fitting in and that you're working alongside a team that's much bigger than the one you came from to drive results for the business.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I just was on the phone today with a guy that manages an enterprise sales team at Amazon for Amazon Web Services. And we were talking a little bit about the transition from startups, which is primarily where he spent most of his career, into Amazon. And he felt like it benefited him a ton to have that startup experience, because a lot of folks that are working at these large enterprises have been there for a while and they've built a career working for large companies, and they're kind of used to operating in a world where, hey, this is your job and you do it and you go home and that's sort of it. And there's really no, pushing initiatives and coming up with new ideas. And he felt like his startup mindset and taking that into a large enterprise was helpful for him because he was pushing new initiatives and ideas. And he felt like sponsorship was something that was really important in big companies, like being able to find other influential and smart people inside of big companies that are also ascending in their careers inside that large company is important. But I think you're right. It doesn't have to be that you have to shift to, I'm a big company person now. I think there's opportunities to bring some of those principles and mindsets and attitudes from what you learned working in startups and use that to be even more successful in an enterprise environment. Have you seen any benefits on that side yourself, like coming into an enterprise with, startup experience like you had before?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it is something that's very noticeable in terms of the different personalities and approaches of someone with a startup background compared to someone who's largely worked at big companies and is farther along in their career. I think startup people, for the most part, are hungrier, more aggressive, more proactive, which I think moving into a bigger company like Splunk has definitely benefited me. And I think the management team kind of likes how it's rubbed off on other people, because you never want to get complacent. And I'm not saying people at bigger companies are always complacent, but just it's a different mentality to that you need to have at a startup. It's very sink or swim. So sometimes you have to do things that are a bit unnatural to be successful. I mean, yeah, I've definitely benefited from my startup background and the mentality that I had that led me to be successful at a place like Telesign and is allowing me to be successful at Splunk for sure.
Well, and we talked a little bit about some of the things that you learned from skilled leaders that have done this a ton of times, like Mark Craney and Forrest and Matt and other folks like that. Anything you want to share that you learned, like, tips or tricks to reps? I think one thing we talked about was leveraging VC networks yesterday is an interesting thing that you took away from some of your experiences with some of these bigger companies. But yeah, any tips you could share would be great.
Yeah, I mean, kind of expanding on what you just mentioned, and really up until SignalFX, I didn't have good exposure to VCs. So that was something I learned working with Mark and Andreessen Horowitz, is leveraging those relationships within strategic accounts to help break down barriers and accelerate sales processes. So figuring out kind of if the board has any connections, if anyone within a larger VC has connections where they can make warm introductions, and really using that VC as a partner too, right? So, I mean, they've invested in your company, so they have a lot to gain with your success. So figuring out how you can partner, and Andreessen Horowitz does these big executive briefings where they'll fly in major companies and executives from those companies and allow you to do a pitch day where all the portfolio companies have an opportunity to come in and spend 30 minutes with a prospect and show them kind of who you are, what you do, what problems you solve. So the VC side of things has been great to learn about. Another thing I've learned, just the people that you mentioned, it's a diverse group of leaders. Everyone has their unique style. And it's taught me you don't need to you don't have to have a certain style, right? You could take a creative approach and still be successful. And it's really benefited me working from such a diverse group of people because I've kind of pulled things from all of their styles and kind of molded it into my own. I'm not saying I have like the best of everyone, but it's been cool working under people that range from being pretty even keeled to super aggressive and have different levels of experience and different backgrounds.
Yeah, I mean, I think sales is just as much about getting to know who you are and really understanding your style and your voice and making it work for you. You know, sales is pretty stereotyped. I think everyone tends to think that we're like fast talking, swindling salespeople that are extroverted. But in my experience, like they come in all shapes and sizes with all different types of backgrounds and personality types. I think the folks that I've seen it do it at the highest level are the ones that know who they are, they know their strengths, they know their weaknesses, and they know how to exploit those in the conversations and the processes that they're driving with customers. I mean, I think to close it out, Chris, this has been a great conversation. And I think like there's some great pieces of advice in everything that you said today. I couldn't thank you enough for the time that you've invested in this. And I know, speaking on behalf of Sean, we're rooting for you to continue to crush it in your career. We hope our paths cross again. And I know any company that has the luxury of having them work for you is super, super fortunate. So thanks for this, man.
Yeah, no, I enjoyed it. I appreciate you guys having me on. Hopefully you can grow this thing and get a Joe Rogan type deal from Spotify and retire as a multi-millionaire. So it's fun. I'll follow you guys along, and it was good catching up too. It's been too long.
Awesome. Okay.
Thanks,
Chris.
Cool.
We'd really like to ask our listeners to help us out, and please go ahead and rate our show 5 stars and leave us a positive review. Our show is quickly growing, and it's greatly due to your amazing support. On our next episode in 2 weeks, we sit down with Scott Ingram, the founder of Sales Success Media. It's home of the Sales Success Stories podcast, the Daily Sales Tips podcast, Sales Success Summit, and the book Sales Success Stories, 60 stories from 20 top 1% sales professionals. There will be some amazing stories from his over 20-year sales career and from folks that he's interviewed over the years. Be sure to check it out and make sure to subscribe so you're notified every time a new episode is released. Thanks for listening.